Hello, good evening, good morning, or greetings to everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm indeed delighted and very honored to participate in this conference and to have the opportunity to share with you some thoughts, some reflections, some prospect on the DLT uses application, in particular on supply chains. What I would like to do in order to structure my presentation today is trying to design a kind of analytical framework. I would like to develop a sort of taxonomy of what are the different areas of impact of DLT powered or DLT inspired models, uses and application on the traditional structure, development and evolution of supply chains. So before starting, I'm trying to share with you and discuss with you this idea of the taxonomy of areas of impact, and therefore subsequently to see what would be the legal challenges of these different, as I say, point of friction of areas of impact. What I would like to stress is two things that, in my opinion, are very important to understand the scope of our discussion. First, this idea of DLT as a unique or singular technology. I'm not going to use DLT in that sense. I'm going to refer to DLT with two particular expression or two particular manifestation. The first one is DLT is usually transformative and especially disruptive when it's implemented in combination with other technologies. Indeed, when we can see at the moment that is extremely disruptive and is becoming a turning point in our traditional way of applying existing rules, is the fact that we are dealing with complex, sophisticated technological ecosystem. And within this technological ecosystem, we may have, as I will explain in a moment, we may have centralized platforms or DLT-based platforms in combination with synergies with other technologies, Internet of Things, big data analytics, artificial intelligence, automated decision making. So when I will refer to DLT, what I'm having in mind is an ecosystem where DLT define a particular structure, essentially, and a particular operation. So that is essentially the first, I would say, caveat that I would like to raise. The other caveat is that when I refer to DLT, I insist on that, I'm not only referring to a specific application of DLT. So for example, application in traceability of food. What I'm going to explain, at least this is my approach, is how DLT represents a model. And this model is impacting largely and substantially on the traditional way of designing, developing, and operating supply chain. So my idea is to show how indeed the impact of DLT, conceived as a model, as a business model, as a way to design, structure, and develop activities, is indeed impacting in the essence of supply chains as they have been traditionally designed. So with this scope as the background of my presentation, let me just elaborate this idea of a taxonomy of areas of impact of DLT. So I believe that DLT is impacting on supply chain because it is enabling, accelerating, and promoting a profound transformation of supply chain. So it's in a way accelerating the transition of traditional supply chains to a completely new model of global value chain. So the taxonomy that I propose for our discussion is based precisely on transition. So we are still in the process of. So where we can see at the moment is how supply chains are incorporating and implementing DLT-based models, DLT-based application, and in applying or in implementing DLT-based models and application, they are facilitating this transition toward a new scenarios. So this transition design the structure of my taxonomy. And I have identified 6 different transition that I'm going to enumerate first, and then I will give you a more elaborated idea what I believe that this transition means. First, we have a transition from bilateral relationship as the ADN of supply chains in a very traditional scheme to multilateral global value chains. So from bilateral to multilateral. The second transition is from linear to circular. I really believe that this is a fundamental transformation of supply chains that was traditionally designed as a line, as a chain, so therefore linear, therefore based on bilateral relationship, duly changed one with the next one. And we are now designing circular global value chains. And this is definitely fundamental for many reasons, but for legal purposes is key. The third transition that I see is probably very obvious, is from document to data. So from document-based supply chains to data-driven global value chains. And we will see the implication in a minute. The next transition is from information silos to permissioned role-based access to data. And this is another fascinating application that I will elaborate on in a minute. And then last transition that for me conclude this taxonomy of areas of impact is from manual processes to automated decision making. So this is the taxonomy of how I see the impact of DLT on supply chains. Let me please elaborate a little bit more on one by one. The first and probably more visible impact of DLT in supply chains is how it's providing a new way of organizing, designing, structuring supply chain from bilateral relationship to multilateral relationship. Multilateral relationship as the new business model for global value chains can be, however, designed under two different models, two different submodels, if I may. The first one is design supply chains as platforms. And when I use this concept, platform, I am using a very particular model of platforms, centralized platforms, where there is an operator of the platform, and this operator of the platform is entitled, is empowered to regulate the platform, to supervise the platform, to facilitate dispute resolution within the platform. So the different actors of these supply chains becomes user of this platform under the management, the operation, the supervision of the operator of the platform. So as you can see, that reshape completely our traditional way of understanding supply chains, because the basis is not anymore a sequence of bilateral relationship among the different actors of the chain. On the contrary, all the different actors that play any role in the supply chain are at the same time simultaneously user of this platform. This model of centralized platform is becoming more and more relevant, attracting indeed the attention of international, regional, and national legislators and lawmakers and regulators as well. So for instance, the most recent initiative adopted by the European Union, such as the DSA or the DMA, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Market Act, clearly has as the center of gravity platforms, conceived as centralized model, centralized organizational model. What is interesting in this way of organizing supply chains as a platform is, as you can see, that platforms operate as one-to-many scheme. So what that means that even if the ultimate aim of the platform is to create a common environment within all the different actors of the supply chain may interact with others, in order to create a platform, we need to conclude, again, a bilateral contract between the user, so I insist, all the actors of the supply chain, and the operator of the platform. So it is multilateral. Indeed, the platform is multilateral, but it is designed as a complex bundle of contract All of them are, however, bilateral. So we have a bilateral relationship, entry into the platform and all the users, and then different bilateral relationships that are concluding within the platform among the different users that are the different actors of the supply chain. So as you can see, the bilateral character of the relationship has not been replaced by the fact of having a platform, but we have a common environment within this bilateral relationship are regulated, are supervised, are performed. On the other side of the spectrum, and this is where DLT come to the fore, we have an alternative design, alternative model that is precisely this idea of a distributed layer technology-based model. In those cases, the multilaterality is very evident. It's absolute, if I may use this word. And why is absolute? Because in this case, there is not a central operator, at least in this end of the spectrum that we are describing. So we can't really believe, we can't really assume that the way of organizing this kind of model is purely a multilateral agreement among all the parties. Assuming probably that each new actor joining the platform is adhering to this multilateral agreement that define the rules of this new decentralized supply chain. So as you can see, this first transition from bilateral to multilateral provide us with two different models. And the legal implication of these two different models are significantly different. I may anticipate that if the legal challenges of platforms are largely, or at least very effectively addressed by the current legislation, or is going to be, in short, properly addressed by the future legislation, as for example, the DSA that I mentioned before, we cannot say the same about the pure decentralized, distributed models if the supply chain adopt this kind of DLT, pure DLT-based model. So as we'll mention, I will say at the very end of my intervention, what are the problems that are not solved so far. The second level of my taxonomy, the second layer, is from linear supply chains to circular global value chains. So this new structure, this new design of global value chains means that parties are simultaneously, concurrently interacting each other. And that has a lot of consequences. From a business point of view, have a lot of benefits. For example, the possibility of payment settlement directly among the parties without the need of an intermediary, without the need to go through all the chain with the different bilateral relationship between the parties. So that is one business consequences. But from a legal point of view, it's fascinating because one, as you know all very well, one of probably the weakness of the current supply chain is precisely how to enforce from one actor of the chain to a different actor of the chain that is not bilaterally related to him or her, how to enforce, for instance, a clause that is purely a contractual obligation. If we have a circular conception of global value chains, we can go further, and we may see, we may foresee probably the possibility of direct enforcement of different contractual obligations, precisely because what we have at the very end is a multilateral agreement among all the different actors of the value chain. The next layer of my taxonomy is from document to data. And this is not purely technological. It is not purely organizational, because from these two perspectives, the benefits are very, very evident. It's essentially legal. So what DLT in combination, not only DLT, but in combination with other technologies, is providing us, is giving us the opportunity to implement, is in a way disassemble the concept of document as a unit of data, in a way fenced or shielded by the medium itself, by the paper or the electronic medium, but the medium itself. What we do is to unpack or maybe to disassemble, to use this kind of metaphorical ideas, in order to forget the document as a structured unit and start to dealing and processing data. So this kind of global value chains are essentially data driven. And that has a lot of consequences, a lot of benefit and advantages from the point of view of value added to the global chain. But as I will mention in the last couple of minutes of my presentation, is that it also has a lot of consequences from a legal point of view, because many of the legal rules related to documents that are electronic transferable record, for instance, they are in a way related to actions such as issuing the document, receiving the document. There are a lot of elements that in a way they are embedded into the concept that we have document that has a particular legal nature. One with this structure, complete the document, and we only have data, we need to reconsider carefully how can we apply all these kind of benefits, such as enforceability of the document, or for instance, the enforceability or the effect of certain right to third parties, for instance, or the protection of the parties of the document. So just to give you an idea of how substantial is to transition from document to data. The next layer is from information silos to permission role-based access to data. What is extraordinary when we think about DLT data-based supply chains is that instead of having a sequence of a document that are sent from one actor to the next point of the chain, where we have is a kind of repository where the different data also document, but essentially the different data that is produced by the actors of the supply chain are stored there. And what that means that this information is available when it's needed, and is available to whom is entitled to access that data. That is the reason why we have to go toward what I called permissioned role-based access. Role-based because depending on the role that the different actors of the chain has, it will be entitled to access certain data. And this idea is fundamental, because as you know very well, this idea of DLT is always associated to enhancing and improving transparency, and that is good. Transparency throughout the whole supply chain, that is really good. But at the same time, we have to guarantee confidentiality, and we have to make this permanent availability of data efficient. And in order to do that, data is going to be filtered and screened and selected in order to be accessed by the party who need it. It's not the same if you are a cargo shipper or you are a customs authority. You will need different data, and that is going to be determined by your role, the role in the supply chain. The next transition is from sequential to real-time availability. That is very much related to what I have been explaining before. This real-time availability is completely different from the traditional supply chain. In the traditional supply chain, information is available when it's coming to your, if I may, part of the chain where you are participating. In this case, when we use DLT, the real-time availability is critical, is crucial, and provide us a lot of benefits. For example, the possibility of traceability and the possibility of react expeditiously when something happens, when something is going wrong. And therefore, the efficiency of the global value as a whole is extraordinarily benefited from that. And the next transition is as well fascinating and comes from the connection between DLT and other technology. That is the transition from manual processes to automated decision making. So the possibility of using, not necessarily in all cases, smart contract as well, but not only, but also the possibility of automating different tasks, processes, or particular decision making relevant for the global, for the supply chain, the global value chain. So this is the taxonomy that I, as I try to explain, I regard, I understand as a taxonomy of transition from existing models to new models. Let me just try to summarize quickly the legal challenges. So assuming this taxonomy, assuming that we are in this period of transition, what kind of legal challenges this new models we are heading to raise. First, this idea of having multilateral, decentralized, circular supply chains means that we need probably to reconsider two things. The first one, who are the actors of the supply chain? Because indeed, when we have platforms that are centralized, new actors are coming to the fore, new actors are in the scene. These actors are part of the supply chains. These actors are simply specialized in governing this kind of platforms. What is the role of this platform, of these new actors, new players in the market? So first, reconsider the actors involved in supply chain. But second, and probably this is even more fascinating, is what is going to be the role of contract? Because in addition to technology, because technology is extremely powerful and efficient in creating structures and in establishing relationship and even more in self-executing remedies, but what we really need in order to make this technology not only efficient but also enforceable is to have contract. So as you can see, contract is playing a fundamental role again in designing supply chains, because a platform is based on contract, but also this kind of decentralized global value chains has to be based on platforms as well. So is that relevant? For many reasons. For example, as we have been mentioned before, when we talk about, for example, metaverses, this idea of applicable law is going to be a question to ask, because if we are in a centralized platform, the establishment, the place of business of the operator of the platform is going to be in many cases irrelevant in order to be the relevant connecting factor for the purpose of, for instance, applicable law or jurisdiction. If we are in a totally decentralized structure, what is going to be the location that might be to an extent relevant? Probably location becomes absolutely relevant, confusing, or could be even manipulated and therefore becomes completely inadequate for being connecting factor, for example, for applicable law or jurisdiction. The next problem that I can see is to which extent this restructuring, in order to conclude in a minute, Harry, to this idea of restructuring document into data may impact on the very legal nature of fundamental documents that feed supply chains. We talk about title of credit, we talk about bill of lading, we talk about documents that have a very particular legal regime that is associated to different aspects. And one of the aspects is precisely that they are titles, they are documents with a very particular life cycle. If we decompose completely this document into data, can we apply comfortably these traditional legal regimes that is indeed laying the foundation of supply chains and all the way of operating supply chains? So we have to rethink the impact, the implication of transforming document into data. And let me just conclude with two other more ideas. Definitely when we automate, so if we transit from manual to automated decision making, we are not only removing manual intervention and human intervention in many aspects, but we are also reallocating liability. We are reallocating liability because in many cases, liability is going to be designed to malfunctioning of the system, bias of the algorithmic decision making, and therefore maybe that required reallocate risk and therefore reconsider liability among the different actors of the supply chain. And finally, is probably providing this new model, new structure, DLT, so essentially decentralized, as I explained before, not purely centralized platform, new ways of resolve and settle dispute among the members of the supply chains. Clearly is a new way of creating the proper, the conducive infrastructure for dispute resolution. Help it or assist it by technology, but not only, because what we really have here, and this is my last statement, is that we have a new way of reconfiguring, reshaping supply chain from linear to circular, from bilateral to multilateral. And that is going to affect clearly to all these traditional international private law aspects, but also to many others, as you can see, contract, liability, traditional transferable records aspect, or dispute resolution. So very happy to elaborate any of these ideas if there is time for Q&A, and very happy to discuss further if we have the opportunity. Thank you very much again for your kind attendance and for the invitation. Thank you.